A 61-year-old sailor from Port Townsend, Washington, was battling relentless waves when he spotted something strange floating amid the storm debris. A dark, half-submerged shape, glinting faintly under flashes of lightning. At first, he thought it was driftwood, until he heard a hollow metallic clang as it scraped the hull of his boat. What he pulled aboard was old, heavy, and locked shut. A corroded steel safe with barnacles gripping its corners like claws. No one could understand how it had surfaced in such a violent storm, let alone why it hadn't sunk long ago. When the tide calmed and he pried it open, what he found inside would not only leave experts stunned, it would make him a millionaire. Authorities were quick to intervene, but even they were left speechless. Would you have dared to open it? If you enjoy unraveling strange, real-life mysteries, subscribe and stay with us. You won't believe how this ends.
Robert Alden was a man of quiet routines and deep waters. At 61 years old, he'd spent over 4 decades as a sailor and fisherman along the fog-draped coast of Washington state. His hands were calloused, his beard streaked with salt and gray, and he knew the tides of Port Townsend like some men know their own heartbeat. He lived alone aboard his modest fishing vessel, the Mirabelle, named after a woman he once loved and never married. Life had hardened him, but not broken him.
He rose before dawn, returned by nightfall, and rarely missed a day on the water, unless the sea warned him not to go. On the morning of the storm, something in the sky unsettled him. The air was thick with tension, like the breath before a scream. A nor'easter was forming fast, and most of the other fishermen had already tied their boats tight. But Robert, ever the pragmatist, saw a narrow window to haul in his crab pots before the gale truly hit. He pushed the Mirabelle out of the harbor at first light, the water already churning with an unnatural energy. He told himself it would be quick, 3 hours at most, and he'd be back before the worst of it came ashore. But nature rarely respects human schedules. By mid-morning, the storm was roaring with the voice of a freight train. The wind howled through the rigging like angry ghosts, and the rain came in sheets, reducing the world to gray chaos. Waves crashed over the bow, and the Mirabelle groaned in protest with every surge. Robert was trying to steer east back toward safer waters when something slammed against the port side of the boat. Clang. It wasn't wood, not plastic, metal, heavy. Startled, Robert fought the wheel, managing to stabilize the vessel just long enough to grab a gaff hook and peer over the edge. There, rolling in the frothy wake like a half-drowned corpse, was a large rectangular shape, obscured by seaweed, muck, and what looked like ancient barnacles. It was dark gray, maybe 3 feet long, and definitely metal. His eyes widened as lightning flashed, illuminating the object. A safe. It was unmistakably a safe, the kind you see bolted to the floors of banks or behind the locked doors of estate homes. It spun slowly in the water, caught in the swirl of the current like some relic regurgitated by the sea itself. A strange metallic relic no one had expected to see, least of all in the middle of a storm. He hesitated. No one in their right mind would attempt to haul something so heavy aboard a small fishing boat during a tempest. But sailors like Robert didn't survive decades on the water by being cautious. They survived by trusting instinct, and Robert's instincts were screaming. Hooking the gaff onto a rusted loop near the safe's corner, he strained to pull it closer. The safe resisted, wedged beneath a cluster of driftwood and rope, but after several desperate minutes, he managed to maneuver it to the stern. The boat rocked violently, taking on water with each lurch, but Robert didn't stop. He used all the strength in his weathered frame to hoist the safe inch by inch until it tipped over the railing and slammed onto the deck with a bone-jarring thud. The impact knocked him backward. He lay there, gasping for breath, rain pounding his face. Then he crawled over, touching the safe. It was colder than ice and slick with brine. The storm raged on, but Robert's focus narrowed. It wasn't just the bizarre presence of a safe that shook him. It was the gut feeling that this was no ordinary piece of scrap metal. Something about it felt wrong or important. When he finally reached the harbor that evening, hours overdue and soaked to the bone, harbor workers helped him secure the boat. Most barely noticed the object lashed to the stern beneath a tarp. They assumed it was salvage, debris from the storm. It wasn't uncommon for fishermen to haul in strange things after a tempest, but Robert said nothing. He didn't tell anyone, not yet. Instead, he waited until nightfall. Then, in the quiet of the marina, he returned to the Mirabelle, peeled back the tarp, and examined the safe more closely. The lock was old, rotary, with corrosion around the dial. The hinges were fused with rust, but the body of the safe was intact. Thick steel, heavy, industrial, possibly antique. He ran his fingers over it and noticed a peculiar symbol etched into one corner beneath the grime, a crude insignia, partially worn away, resembling a serpent coiled around a trident. It didn't look like any modern brand. There was no serial number, no manufacturer's stamp, nothing that indicated origin, and that disturbed him more than he expected. Was it stolen, dumped, or older than it looked? Robert knew enough to recognize when something was out of place, and this safe was undeniably out of place. The timing, the location, the sheer improbability of finding such an object during a violent sea storm, none of it made sense. Still, a more primal question buzzed in his mind. What was inside? The thought kept him awake. He sat alone on the deck under a tarp, oil lamp flickering, rain pattering on the canopy above. Every few minutes his gaze drifted back to the safe like a moth to flame. He didn't want to call the authorities. Not yet. If it was just junk, he'd be a fool. But if it was valuable... The following morning, the storm had passed. The skies were clear, the sea calm, and a salty mist hung over the marina like an exhale after tension. That's when Robert decided he would open it. He wasn't a locksmith, but years of living aboard boats had made him resourceful. He retrieved a crowbar from the cabin and positioned it against the edge of the safe door. It creaked under pressure but didn't budge. He tried the back, then the side, then the lock itself. No luck. Then he remembered the emergency acetylene torch stored under the workbench, a tool he hadn't used in years. With trembling fingers, he assembled it, ignited the flame, and aimed it directly at the rusted hinges. The metal hissed. Sparks flew. After 20 agonizing minutes, a hinge gave way. Then another. The lock was next, softened by heat, pried by force. Then, with a groan that seemed to echo across the empty dock, the door cracked open. A puff of stale metallic air wafted out. Robert coughed and leaned in, holding the lamp above the opening. His breath caught. Inside, nestled in a velvet-lined interior now stained with water and mildew, were 3 silver bars. Thick, heavy, and dark with age. Not ordinary silver. These were stamped with symbols, ancient-looking glyphs he didn't recognize. Each bar was about 8 inches long and gleamed faintly under the lamplight, despite the tarnish. One bore the image of a ship with crossed oars. Another had that same serpent trident insignia he'd seen outside. The third had no symbol at all, only a set of numbers and letters etched in a language Robert couldn't identify. He touched one. It was cold and solid. Real. He lifted it. At least 20 pounds. Silver. Real silver. And very, very old. Robert stood there for a long time, processing. Then, like a man emerging from a trance, he wrapped the bars in canvas, locked them in a tackle box, and placed the now empty safe back under the tarp. He had questions. Many. But there was one thing he knew for certain. This was bigger than he could handle alone. He didn't want to risk keeping it. He didn't want trouble. But if it was historically significant, or linked to a crime, he wanted to do the right thing. And maybe, just maybe, there'd be a reward. The next day, he made the call. The authorities arrived by noon, and when they opened that tackle box and saw the silver for themselves, they stopped speaking mid-sentence. One of them, an officer from the Port Townsend Police Department, simply whispered, "Where the hell did you get these?" Robert explained everything. The storm, the safe, the symbols. They listened, took notes, photographed the bars, and cordoned off the Maribel for evidence processing. That was when things began to escalate. They called in experts, archaeologists, and eventually, federal agents, all for 3 mysterious silver bars pulled from a forgotten safe. What had started as a strange fluke was quickly becoming a full-scale investigation. And Robert, humble sailor of the North Coast, found himself at the center of something he didn't yet understand, but which was already changing his life forever. Robert wasn't used to having so many people on his boat. Over the years, the Maribel had been his sanctuary. A place of quiet routine, of coffee-stained charts and slow-moving days at sea. Now, it was buzzing with tension and unfamiliar voices. Officers moved carefully across the deck, marking spots with yellow tape. A man in a crisp navy blue suit was crouched beside the safe, whispering into a phone while examining the serpent trident insignia with a magnifying glass. The silver bars had been taken for evaluation, but not before multiple photos were snapped and samples scraped. Robert stood nearby, arms crossed, watching his world spin out of the ordinary. One of the men, a younger agent from the Federal Maritime Authority, approached him cautiously. "You sure you've never seen anything like that safe before?" Robert shook his head. "I've pulled nets from wrecks, found anchors, old buoys, even a piece of a wooden mast once, but never anything locked, and never silver." The agent scribbled something into a notepad. Another figure stepped forward, a woman in her late 40s with close-cropped hair and clear authority in her stance. She introduced herself as Dr. Elise Grant, a historical metals specialist from the Pacific Artifact Analysis Institute. She extended her hand. "Mr. Alden, I'd like to speak with you privately about what you found and what it might mean." Robert led her into the small galley of his boat. It smelled faintly of salt, coffee, and the storm's aftermath. She glanced around, then sat at the edge of the bench. "The bars," she began, "aren't just silver. The purity level is unusually high, higher than anything commercially traded in the past century, and the markings suggest a maritime origin." Robert raised an eyebrow. "How old are we talking?" She hesitated. "We're still testing, but based on the corrosion pattern, the glyphs, and the insignia, we may be looking at silver cast over 200 years ago." Robert blinked. "That thing's been underwater that long?" "Possibly. Or it was hidden somewhere that kept it preserved. The real question is, how did it end up in the middle of the strait during a storm?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "We don't think this was lost accidentally, not with those kinds of symbols." "What do you mean?" Dr. Grant paused, then said something Robert didn't expect. "We think it was placed, intentionally and recently." Those words lingered in the air like a dropped anchor. Robert felt a chill, not from the sea breeze, but from the thought that someone had thrown that safe into the water on purpose, during or just before the storm, and not because they wanted it found. He stared at the table, thinking, so, this wasn't just floating around all these years? No, the barnacles are too fresh. The algae growth is recent. We think it was submerged for less than a month. Robert exhaled. His instincts had been right. Something was off. And now he wasn't just a witness. He might be a key piece in a much bigger mystery. By the third day, word had spread beyond Port Townsend. Reporters showed up outside the harbor gates. A drone was spotted flying low over the Maribel. Someone had leaked the story, or at least part of it. Fisherman finds treasure in storm-battered safe. Suddenly, Robert was no longer anonymous. Friends he hadn't spoken to in years called to ask what he'd found. Strangers appeared at the marina, hoping to get a glimpse of the millionaire sailor. But he hadn't received a penny. Not yet. He was still under investigation, not as a suspect, but as the accidental catalyst of something much larger. Back on the boat, Robert kept running through the storm in his mind. Had he seen anything else? Any signs of another vessel? Any markers, flares, or lights in the distance? Nothing. Only the safe, and the feeling that he wasn't supposed to find it. 2 days later, a diver team was dispatched to the coordinates where Robert had first spotted the safe. Using his GPS logs and storm logs from the Coast Guard, they triangulated the drift pattern and descended. What they found confirmed Dr. Grant's theory. Near the seabed, 18 feet down, wedged between jagged rocks, were remnants of a crate, wooden planks, splinters, and iron strapping, consistent with a cargo box that had recently broken apart. Divers also discovered fragments of waxed fabric and rope, possibly used to lower or secure the box underwater. The safe, they concluded, had been stored in this crate, and the storm had dislodged it. One diver surfaced with a sodden leather pouch. Inside was a laminated sheet of paper, partially degraded but still legible. It had a list. 3 items. 2 were crossed out. The third, silver, trident, secure before 10:07. The pouch was marked with the same insignia. Now things were no longer just strange. They were turning dangerous. If someone had placed that safe underwater intentionally, and if 2 other items had been on the list, what had happened to them? Had they already been retrieved? And by whom? Robert, now under the protection of local authorities, was advised to stay off the water for a while. He didn't argue. For the first time in his life, the sea felt less like home and more like a stage for something he didn't understand. In the following week, Forensic teams completed analysis of the silver bars. Each was confirmed to be approximately 97% pure silver, dated to between 1780 and 1810, roughly the era of the early trans-Pacific trading routes. But what startled everyone was this. The bars matched no known shipwreck manifest. Not British, not Spanish, not American. In fact, one historian noted that the trident serpent insignia appeared in only one recorded document, a ledger recovered from a Portuguese vessel captured by the British Navy in 1798. That ledger mentioned a fraternity of the deep, a rumored group of privateers who dealt in contraband, stolen not just from ships, but from underwater hordes protected by maps only they controlled. Many historians dismiss the fraternity as maritime folklore, a myth, a story told in pubs and passed among drunken sailors. But here, in Robert's hands, was real silver bearing their crest. Theories spiraled quickly. Had someone recently discovered an old stash and tried to transport it covertly? Had the storm interrupted an illegal transfer? Or had someone feared discovery and chosen to sink the evidence? No one could say for sure. What Robert did know, however, was this. He'd done the right thing by reporting it. And because of that, the government, after weeks of review and legal procedures, confirmed that Robert was entitled to a salvage reward. They couldn't disclose the full monetary value of the bars, since the items were now part of a historical preservation investigation, but an independent valuation pegged their worth at over $1.8 million. The reward given to Robert, $625,000, taxed, documented, and legally deposited into his account 2 months later. Enough to change everything. He paid off the Maribel, bought new equipment, and finally replaced the broken compass he'd learned to live without for years. He helped fund a scholarship at the local maritime school and donated quietly to the widow of a fisherman who'd drowned the year before. But Robert remained the same man, stoic, humble, loyal to the sea. Only now, he had more eyes on him, more questions, and deep inside, one lingering unease. Because if someone had placed that safe in the water, and if it was part of something bigger, then whoever had been responsible might still be out there, watching, waiting, wondering what else Robert had found, or what he might find next. And that, more than the mystery itself, was what kept him up at night. As for the other 2 items on that soggy list, they were never recovered. The water hides many secrets, and sometimes it gives up only what it wants you to see. Let us know in the comments. What do you think those other 2 items might have been? Could they still be out there, waiting for another storm to shake them loose? Or did someone reach them first? Hit the like button if this story hooked you, subscribe for more mysterious discoveries, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And remember, the sea never forgets, even if we do. When the initial wave of curiosity waned and the media trucks rolled away from the docks, the real experts arrived, quiet, methodical, and far more interested in the details than the headlines. Among them was a man who introduced himself only as Julian Harrow. He wore a beige windbreaker, didn't carry a badge, but had an air of subtle authority. His handshake was firm, but he barely smiled. And his first question to Robert wasn't about the safe, it was about the storm. Tell me exactly where you were, the direction of the current, and how long you saw the safe before it hit your hull. Robert recounted everything again, this time with more technical precision. Julian listened, occasionally glancing down at a notebook that looked more like a well-worn journal than an official document. He asked about wind patterns, swell angles, and if Robert had noticed anything odd in the sky before the storm broke. It became clear that Julian wasn't from the local maritime authority. He was looking for something else. Patterns, perhaps. He wasn't alone. Dr. Elise Grant returned with 2 colleagues from the Pacific Artifact Analysis Institute, Dr. Yan Lin, a marine archaeologist, and Professor Murray Bledsoe, an expert in early European naval codes. Together, they reviewed the bar markings, cross-referenced the symbols, and studied the strange, fragmented document found in the diver's pouch. They spread the pieces on a light table inside a research trailer parked near the harbor and worked late into the night. "We have a partial translation," Dr. Lin said the next morning, gathering Robert, Julian, and a few authorities into the trailer. "The document isn't a cargo manifest. It's more like a ritual ledger." "Ritual?" Robert asked, furrowing his brow. "Not religious necessarily," Bledsoe added. It uses code words, not direct names, but it tracks the movement of objects. The red tooth, sister's bone, and what we assume refers to the silver, the deep pledge. Each item is followed by a date, coordinates, and an instruction. Julian interjected. What kind of instruction? Most are logistical, Lynn replied. Move, submerge, secure. But here's where it gets strange. 2 of the items are followed by a different word. Ascend. Robert's mind was racing. So someone was planning to raise them? Dr. Grant nodded. That's what it looks like. But they only succeeded with 1. Yours. Julian finally showed a reaction. He rubbed his jaw, then stepped outside to make a call. That same day, a team from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, arrived with a scanning vessel. They'd picked up rumors of potentially unstable cargo discovered near shipping lanes, and while their official stance was safety, their presence meant the federal government was now paying close attention. Using high-frequency sonar, the NOAA team mapped the entire section of seabed where the safe had been recovered. What they found was sobering. There was a long, unnatural depression in the sediment, a gouge stretching nearly 20 feet, as if something very large had been dragged or shifted recently. At the end of the trench was a hollow, square imprint, the same size as the safe. That crate was moved, one technician said, or it moved itself. Robert didn't like the sound of that. The next discovery came from a less scientific source. An old fisherman named Tom Reyes, who docked 2 slips down from Robert, came by with a faded photograph he kept in his wallet. It showed a younger Tom standing beside his father on a shrimp boat, dated 1982. Behind them, barely visible on the deck, was a safe that looked nearly identical to the one Robert had pulled from the sea. That thing looks like what we pulled up in '82 just off Whidbey Island, Tom said, tapping the photo. We found it tangled in our nets, but it was so damn heavy we dropped it back in. Dad didn't want anything to do with it. Said it felt cursed. The photo and story sent chills down Robert's spine. That was nearly 40 years ago, meaning the safe, or something like it, had surfaced before. But if it was the same one, how had it disappeared again? And why had it returned now? The team dug deeper into historical records and found a disturbing pattern. Over the past 5 decades, there were at least 6 documented sightings of strange metal containers found near the Olympic Peninsula. Always after storms, always reported briefly, and then vanishing without follow-up. Each case involved something odd. One container sparked radiation concerns before mysteriously disappearing from the Coast Guard archive. Another was said to have contained wax-sealed scrolls, removed by unidentified agents. Robert sat on the dock, staring out at the calm water. The more they learned, the less sense it all made. What had started as a storm salvage was unraveling into a decades-long mystery. And the silver? It was just the surface. Later that week, Dr. Lynn returned with a startling update. The trident serpent insignia wasn't exclusive to the so-called Fraternity of the Deep, she said. It's also found in several hidden coastal maps we acquired from the archives of an old British naval surveyor, Thomas Boring, 1806. Hidden maps? Robert asked. Maps layered under topographical charts, accessible only with UV light. We believe Boring was part of a secret expedition assigned to track the movement of privateer treasure ships. One of his notes mentioned an island cove off the coast of Washington, described only as the mouth of Leviathan. Professor Bledsoe brought out a projected overlay. It showed the coast, and a crescent-shaped indentation near Cape Alava, labeled in faint ink. There, he pointed. That's your Leviathan. Julian leaned in, studying the image. If that's where the silver came from, it might still be there. Bledsoe finished. The team quickly organized a reconnaissance trip, using 2 rigid inflatable boats and a drone to survey the isolated inlet. Robert was invited to join, but declined. He had a feeling he'd already seen more than he was supposed to. The footage they brought back was both breathtaking and unsettling. The cove was lined with crumbling rock formations, natural arches, and strange outcroppings resembling vertebrae or spines. The drone picked up heat anomalies beneath one of the cliffs, possible vents or something else. But more chilling was the discovery of a shallow cave accessible only during low tide. Inside the cave, barely visible, were rusted loops in the stone, mooring rings. Someone, at some point in time, had been anchoring things inside that cave. Safes, crates, cargo. The question was, for what purpose? And who had returned recently enough to dislodge one of them? On their final day of the survey, the team recovered a small lead capsule buried under a pile of stones in the cave. Inside were two things: a brittle piece of parchment with ciphered writing, and a ring. The ring was silver, stamped with the trident serpent. They sealed the site, reported their findings to the State Archaeological Office, and quietly began discussions about designating the cove as a protected historical site. But not everything could be protected. A week later, a night watchman at the harbor noticed a man in a hooded jacket standing near the Maribel at 3:12 a.m. By the time he approached, the figure was gone, but left behind a single object on the boat's stern, a small stone figurine shaped like a ship with a serpent wrapped around it. No note, no message, just that. Robert took it as a warning, or a reminder. He gave it to Dr. Grant, who promised to analyze it, but he didn't ask for updates. Some things, he decided, were better left at the bottom of the sea, but others, like truth, have a way of rising, no matter how deep you bury them. If you've stayed with us this far, you're probably asking the same question we are. Who left that safe under the sea, and why now? Could it have been part of a larger, still active network, or simply a final echo from a forgotten brotherhood of smugglers? Let us know in the comments. What's your theory? Do you think Robert was lucky or chosen? Hit the like button if you're fascinated by stories like this. Subscribe for more real-life mysteries from the depths. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach across the world. And keep watching, because sometimes the tide brings back more than driftwood. What had started as a freak discovery during a violent storm was now shaping into something far deeper, older, and more tangled than Robert Alden or anyone else could have imagined. By the fourth week, the silver bars had undergone full metallurgical and historical analysis. The verdict stunned even the most skeptical experts. Not only were the bars authentic, but they were also unique. Unlike Spanish treasure or British minting standards of the 18th and 19th centuries, these bars bore a combination of styles: Portuguese edges, East Indian silver alloy signatures, and symbols no one could definitively place. And one detail stood out among the rest: micro-etchings on the underside of one bar, only visible under infrared light. They weren't serial numbers, they were coordinates, not GPS. Latitude and longitude, noted in a style used by maritime cartographers in the 1700s. Those coordinates pointed to a stretch of sea nearly 200 miles southwest of Port Townsend, closer to the Olympic Trench, a deep underwater canyon largely unexplored due to dangerous currents and sheer depth. Theories spiraled. Had the fraternity of the deep been real? Had they mapped locations no one else had access to, ancient hoards beneath the Pacific, unreachable caches stashed underwater or inside caverns only known to a secret few? The press didn't have access to these details. The government classified much of the investigation, labeling it heritage protection to avoid public interference. But Robert heard everything. He was brought in for further questioning, not because he was suspected of wrongdoing, but because they believed he may have triggered something dormant. Storms like that don't just dislodge random objects, Julian Harrow told him during their last meeting at the marina. Something was stirred up, something old. Maybe it's not just the safe that rose to the surface. Robert didn't say anything at first. He stared out at the dark water, silent. But eventually, he answered. Or maybe it wanted to be found. Julian didn't dismiss the idea. In a quiet moment later that night, Robert stood on his boat and laid the strange silver ring found in the lead capsule inside the cave, beside a compass. Oddly, the compass needle twitched when the ring drew near. Not wildly, just enough to notice. The next morning, a new team arrived. Oceanographers with deep-sea submersible drones. Their mission was clear: investigate the coordinates hidden on the silver bar. The NOAA ship Red Spire was assigned to the task. It carried advanced unmanned vehicles capable of descending 6,000 meters. The area around the Olympic Trench was treacherous, unpredictable, and yet it matched several patterns from the ancient maps recovered by the historical team. The dive began on a clear day. The ocean was still, as if aware of what was about to be disturbed. As the drone descended, its cameras streamed eerie footage: pale fish darting through chasms, ancient geological formations untouched by light, and then something artificial. At 4,126 meters, the camera passed over a massive metal surface, too symmetrical to be natural. The drone circled back.
What came into view silenced the team on board. It was a hatch, circular, embedded into the sea floor, made of aged bronze or copper, impossible to date precisely due to biogrowth. Around the rim were markings, etched in the same glyphic pattern found on the silver bars. Dr. Lin gasped. That's not a coincidence. The drone hovered. They didn't attempt to open it. They didn't even touch it. The team simply recorded the sight and returned to the surface. The hatch was real, and it was waiting. Suddenly, the significance of the safe changed. It wasn't just an old artifact. It was a message, a key, or a warning. Robert was briefed but not brought aboard the Red Spire. He didn't need to be. He already felt it. The ring, the compass needle, the unease since that storm. It all pointed to something deeper than treasure. The silver wasn't meant to enrich. It was meant to lead. The authorities decided to suspend exploration of the trench indefinitely, citing budget concerns and potential geological instability. But insiders whispered another reason: fear. There were too many unknowns. Why did the compass react to the ring? Why was a hatch hidden 5 kilometers under the ocean bearing the same glyphs found on smuggled silver? And more importantly, who put it there? One expert proposed a theory that sent chills through the team. What if the fraternity of the deep wasn't just a band of smugglers or pirates? What if they were guarding something not theirs? The team went silent. Back in Port Townsend, Robert tried to return to his old life, but the harbor felt different. The sea was no longer just water and wind. It was a threshold. Every creak of the boat, every foghorn, every ripple on the surface now carried the weight of unseen things. He began receiving anonymous letters, typed, postmarked from cities across the country. They all said the same thing: do not go back, it is not yours. No signature, no return address. And then one morning a final envelope arrived. Inside was a photo, blurry grayscale, of the drone's footage. The underwater hatch, circled in red, and beneath it, scribbled in ink, one was opened before. That night, Robert didn't sleep. He thought about the safe, the bars, the ring, the cave, the hatch, and he realized something terrifying. The storm didn't just reveal something, it reacted to something. Whatever had been hidden for centuries wasn't inert. It was patient, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, it was waking up. If you've been following this incredible journey from the beginning, we want to hear from you. Do you believe the fraternity of the deep was real? What do you think lies beneath that hatch in the trench? Was this just a coincidence, or part of something far older and more deliberate? Let us know in the comments, your theories, your thoughts, your questions. Where are you watching from? We love seeing just how far these stories echo. Hit the like button if this story pulled you into its depths. Subscribe for more chilling discoveries, real-life enigmas, and stories that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. And remember, sometimes it's not the storm that brings the danger, it's what it leaves behind. The authorities acted fast after the image of the hatch leaked. Too fast. Within 48 hours of Robert receiving the anonymous envelope, the entire area surrounding the Olympic Trench was declared a restricted maritime zone. A research safety perimeter, they called it. But the truth was clear. Access was being shut down, not for safety, but for secrecy. The Noe ship Red Spire quietly left port under heavy weather cover, its crew barred from speaking to media. Submersibles were locked away. Dive data was scrubbed. The footage of the hatch, though confirmed real, vanished from every official source. And just like that, the sea swallowed the mystery again. But not for Robert. He still had the ring. And more disturbingly, he still had the compass. The ring continued to affect it, more strongly with each passing day. The needle no longer just twitched, it pulled. Whenever the ring was near, the compass needle veered to the west, toward the trench, or something deeper. He tested this again and again. Different compasses, different locations, same result. The ring pointed, not to magnetic north, to something else. Late one night, Robert stood on the dock with a map, the compass, and a flashlight. Following the direction the needle pulled, he traced a line that bypassed the trench coordinates and extended to a tiny, unnamed island off the coast of British Columbia, barely more than a rock on the map. But it was on the path. And in that moment, a seed of dangerous curiosity took root in Robert's heart. He had questions that no authority could answer, and a quiet voice,
growing stronger by the day, urging him to go. Not for silver, not for fame, but for truth. He prepared carefully. No fanfare, just extra fuel, a satellite phone, survival gear, and a waterproof satchel containing the compass, the ring, and a laminated copy of the trench coordinates. He didn't tell anyone, not even Dr. Grant, who had become his closest confidant throughout the ordeal. The morning he departed, the harbor was fogged in. The Maribel moved slowly through the mist, its motor humming like a heartbeat beneath the water. The compass needle held steady, pointing him forward, westward into the unknown. The journey took nearly a day and a half. The sea was calm, unnaturally so. As night fell on the second day, the island came into view, black rock jutting out of the ocean like a tooth. No trees, no beach, just a sloped face and a hollow at its base, like a mouth waiting to swallow something. He anchored the boat and rowed ashore. There, on the leeward side of the island, hidden from view, was an indentation in the rock, barely large enough for a man to crawl through. The compass needle spun violently. The air inside was warmer than expected, metallic and stale. He crawled forward, the beam of his headlamp slicing through the darkness, and then he saw it. Symbols, the same ones etched on the silver bars, on the hatch, on the ring. They covered the walls in looping, interconnected spirals, some faint, some glowing subtly under the light. He kept going. 10 feet in, the tunnel widened, and there, half buried in silt, was another safe, identical in size. Same serpent trident insignia, but this one had been pried open long ago. The door hung off one hinge. The inside was empty, except for one thing, a small piece of stone, smooth, black, and etched with an unfamiliar mark, like a star collapsing inward. Robert reached out. As his fingers brushed the stone, the compass in his bag shattered, and the ring on his finger grew cold, painfully cold. He jerked his hand back, but the mark was already on his palm, burned into the skin. When he stumbled back into daylight, the fog was gone. The sea was calm, but he was not the same man who had gone in. Back in Port Townsend, Robert said nothing. He told no one of the second safe, or the mark on his hand. He sold the Maribel to a young couple who dreamed of sailing south, away from the mystery. He moved inland, quietly, anonymously, as if trying to forget. But at night the dream returned, a hatch opening beneath the sea, a city of black spires rising in silence, and a voice, not speaking, but knowing, whispering his name through the water. Some mysteries once opened cannot be closed. Some discoveries once unearthed pull you in, forever. And the safe? It was never just about treasure. It was a door, one that someone, or something, left slightly ajar, just long enough for a storm, and a man, to find it. So now we ask you, what would you have done? Would you have opened it? Would you have followed where the compass pointed? Or would you have walked away? Tell us in the comments what you think was really hidden under the ocean. Just silver, or something far more ancient. And tell us where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories reach. If this story fascinated you, click like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another true tale from the edge of belief. And remember, not everything the sea gives back should be brought to the surface.